Hey guys, I'm Urizi. This story is all about what if Naruto was assigned to Asuma and Team 10. Mizuki never got to shoot his mouth off at Naruto the night he took the Scroll of Seals. Other than skipping a half-manic monologue from him, what exactly did this change for everyone's favorite blonde ninja? Who knows? Before we proceed with the story, please like and subscribe to this channel if you liked the video, and don't forget to check the description for the other works of the author if you liked the story. Let's start. Chapter 46, Youth Revolution. Haku's mist creating jutsu had been a godsend. While she claimed that Zabuza hadn't taught her much about his silent killing technique, she was clearly adept enough at the technique to easily avoid any people that could possibly detect her or her direct accompaniment in the mission at hand, Sarutobi Asuma. Asuma had taken the lead, with comments from Haku on how to avoid patrols and areas choked with people. It was kind of unnerving for him to have the student of a silent killing master being his eyes and ears in the mist. If Haku had held on to any bitter feelings to how he had killed Zabuza in battle years ago, all she really had to do was just take a moment and try to take him out. Or try to anyway. But that was still stupid for a different reason other than the fact that he was sure that he could take her on and win quite handily. They were in the middle of no man's land in Port D'Igarashi, and getting busted before they even got to sea was going to keep her from ever getting back to Kirigakure. What would she have done to reach out for assistance if the Konoha option fell through? Go to Kumogakure. Good luck with that. Haku-san. Asuma whispered as they had reached the docks by that time. Anko and Yamato weren't too far away procuring a ship somewhere, but they weren't necessarily close either. We need to prevent any of the other ships from leaving the harbor. That's how we're going to make sure there's no way we can be followed. The quiet sound of the water ebbing and flowing actually managed to sound over the conversation being had by the two ninja concealing themselves in the mist and the dock supplies they were hiding amongst. That eerie mask turned his way to let him know that Haku was indeed looking his way and listening to his request. Of course, Sarutobi-san, but do you already have a plan on how you're going to go about this? Asuma nodded and pulled out a large fistful of explosive tags. Plant these in the sweet spots on the ships and blow those things right out of the water. They can't chase us without a vessel to follow with, can they? Haku merely pulled off her mask to reveal a good-natured smile as she shook her head. Asuma-san, that is too noisy. We want to be able to escape before the enemy ever realizes we obtained a ship from them. With a dry look on his face, Asuma just stared at the young woman as she reaffixed the porcelain mask to her face and looked around their surroundings as best she could in the midst of her own creation. Since you said that, I assume you have a plan to do this without making a boom. Haku didn't speak, instead creating several hand seals before hopping off of the dock and landing as light as a feather on the surface of the ocean water. Light ripples emerged from the water where she touched down until it quickly frosted over and froze solid. Asuma watched from his point of view as Haku began to freeze the entire bay solid around the ships in sight. Frost even began to form around the bottom of the hulls of the ships. Once she felt she had frozen enough of the area's water over, Haku jumped back onto the dock and looked at her handiwork with a nod, feeling that she had done enough to that area to detain the vessels there from being able to break free and pursue them once the time came. Hyaton, Hyojin no Jutsu, Ice Release, Ice Field Jutsu, ... She said calmly as she rejoined the Konoha Jonin. Shall we proceed to the next area and continue? Asuma just shook his head and led the way to the next station of the harbor to continue their work. Kids were just getting scarier and scarier these days. He hoped his own child would end up being a terror, because the stuff some of these brats could do, well, he or she would definitely need to be. Elsewhere in D'Igarashi Port, Wasabi Family Mansion. Gurren was not going to screw around with Naruto. Not for a moment. She was going to go for the kill immediately. Outright ignoring Naruto's testing move of sending out 5 clones to check her defenses, Gurren wasted no time in ridding herself of the nuisances as she advanced across the main mansion rooftop towards the original, Shouten, Suishauerhari, Crystal Release, Crystal Needles. She seemingly created multiple long pink crystals from nothing and fired them at Naruto's clones. The attacks pierced them and returned them to smoke, and even one to ash and impaled themselves in the roof. Without a beat being missed, Naruto's machete came careening through the air with its extremely long chain attached. Gurren hit the deck, dropping to her belly on the rooftop as she could feel the ripping air of the chain swing over her head. Nature manipulation had been added into those two tools. She didn't want to risk trying to block such an attack with her crystal defenses yet, since if he were willing to attack her after his previous defeat, he probably assumed that his technique could break through. From her place on her belly, Gurren formed several crystal shuriken and hurled them at Naruto as his machete was pulled by the chain back into his hand. Naruto blocked the solid pink projectiles and sheathed the weapon before shoving his hands into the surface of the roof, breaking through just underneath it. Giga Shinto, Giga Impact. Naruto twisted his hands and ripped them both from beneath the roof. The action and the concentrated pressure of his wind technique started carving a grinding path through the roof to where Gurren was lying down for cover. She quickly pushed herself up and dodged the path that was running right towards her before she found herself caught up in it. Gurren could see that Naruto's jutsu had ripped up enough of the roof that she could see the underlying support beams for their top level of the building. That would have stripped the flesh right off of my bones. What a simple attack though. It was just him using wind-based chakra with pure brute force. There were no technical mechanics involved whatsoever. The attack from the Konoha-chunin didn't subside though, and Naruto was right there attacking Gurren with his machete once more. First with an attack from the sky that missed and sliced cleanly into the roof. By then Gurren was ready to fight back with her ever-present blade on the back of her wrist. The two traded strikes back and forth, but not only did Gurren find that gaining ground in a melee fight with Naruto was exceedingly difficult, her arm blade eventually broke due to the constant barrage of Naruto's machete. Gritting her teeth, she allowed it to shatter from one of Naruto's swings and planned in advance to deliver a retaliatory kick to his stomach that landed, knocking him away from her far enough to let her get some distance with a small retreat. Naruto held his torso and growled as he watched Gurren get some distance. That wasn't going to be good for him. He'd seen full well in the past what Gurren could do if given a bit of space and time to prepare. Not this time. Setsudenki Hasa, Slingshot Guillotine. Letting fly with his machete and chain once more, Naruto targeted Gurren mid-retreat as she ran up the gentle and then harsh slope of the mansion's steeple. She was fast enough to avoid it, but Naruto's machete and chain milled right through the building architecture and sent it tumbling over. Gurren cursed under her breath as the structure fell and jumped onto one of the exposed beams that Naruto's clear cutting of the steeple exposed. Destructive little shit, wasn't he? Dangerous. This was a nice home before you got here. Gurren said, somewhat tauntingly, it's a good thing I don't live here though, so I don't really care about it. Her face then twisted into a scowl as she made three hand signs, Shouten, Suishao Kyo, Crystal Release, Jade Crystal Mirror. Naruto watched a mirror in the form of a snowflake form directly in front of Gurren. He didn't understand why she had created it though. He could break that easily and he knew that she was aware of that. It wasn't a sturdy defense at all, thus Naruto was prepared for an attack. But it wasn't supposed to defend her from anything, nor was it a direct method of attacking him either. From the mirror, several clones of Gurren climbed out from what seemed to be her very reflection itself. Not illusionary copies either. He could feel their presences and they moved independently of each other and of Gurren herself, who just continued to stand behind the mirror looking quite smug. You didn't think you were the only one with a high-level clone jutsu, did you? Gurren asked as her clones spaced out, all positioned across the roof. Suishao Bunshin no Jutsu, Jade Crystal Clone Jutsu. Lovely, aren't they? The real Gurren from behind her mirror tapped it with her finger and shattered it into pieces as her clones lunged at Naruto directly to attack him at once. A quick lunge from three of the clones had them bearing down on Naruto swiftly. He was able to dodge the punches of two of them before he cut straight through another with his machete and shattered it to bits. Naruto had to shut his eyes and pull his goggles down over them to protect his vision as pieces of sharp crystal cut his face and clothing, even through his arm warmers as he continued on to the next set of copies. I can appreciate a good clone jutsu. As he reached the next two clones, Naruto avoided a punch from one by simply cutting its arm off. While the other one attacked his unarmed side, he formed a Rasengan in his free hand and shoved it straight through his enemy. Thank you, Jiraiya. Actually, thank you, Yondaime Hokage. Uninterested Gurren stood back and watched Naruto handle her clones, trying to observe his patterns and what she could determine of his preferences. Seeing him take down 5 had been enough for her, and with a snap of her fingers the other clones that had been moving into position to engage Naruto next all burst into particles of crystal. Shouten, Shuriken Ranbyu, Crystal Release, Shuriken Wild Dance. Naruto found himself surrounded by a storm of crystal particles that began cutting into his clothing and flesh as he covered himself up. Gurren merely cackled as she saw Naruto simply defend himself as best he could by curling up. Not so tough after all, was he? Fumin no Jutsu, Wind Ripple Jutsu. From his curled up position, he abruptly stood straight up and thrust his arms out, pushing away the crystal pieces in all directions with a low boom. Gurren's hair got blown back a bit as pieces of her own crystal attack flew past her. All she did was dust the bits and pieces that got onto her clothing off. I see what you specialize in, Gurren said as she confidently placed a hand on her hip and observed a slightly bloodied Naruto stare her down. You hide it well enough with some of your other techniques like what you do with the ash, but you're still just a close-range fighter. He could dress it up all he liked with his little machete and chain trick. At its core that was still a direct melee attack. And his sealing techniques, he had to be close enough to make full palm contact with at least one hand, two for the stronger ones. She wasn't even going to bring up the Rasengan itself that he had just used. Yes, you're more comfortable in close. Gurren continued with a smirk. That's unfortunate for you, because I don't plan on getting within 15 feet of you again until I'm checking over your corpse to make sure you're dead. The one who could dictate the range of a battle had the control of the entire situation. I don't need to stay close to my enemy to tear them apart. The bulk of Naruto's ninjutsu that had range were dangerous, but the true treachery of the ranged machete attack or the hot burning ash or the Jiga impact that he used to rip up most of the roof in a straight line just so happened to be that Naruto didn't expect those moves to land. He used them to corral an enemy into a position where he could deliver his more subtle but notably devastating moves like the Rasengan, the famed melee jutsu of Namikaze Minato. She only needed to see it once to know what it was. Orochimaru was rather interested in the pure chakra manipulation before he left Konoha. He never got a piece of the knowledge on it though before he departed the village. Naruto's lips quirked in a moment of amusement before setting his face back to a serious visage. You got me, he said with a bit of a sheepish chuckle. I'm just a straightforward idiot. But then again, it's like standing in the middle of a road with a stampede of oxen heading right at you. Just because you know what's coming, does that mean you can stop it? I did the first time easily enough, didn't I, Jinchuriki boy? That was a long time ago. Indeed. Gurren was aware that the danger of being struck with Naruto's wind chakra through his machete rendered her crystal armor useless. He'd break clean through it and cut into her or through her. She was wasting chakra just trying to find a way to hurt him. He wasn't mindlessly plowing full steam ahead the way he had the first time years ago, and he hadn't even drawn upon the chakra of the Biju within him either. That was what really irked her. That he was matching her without drawing upon a secondary source of power, and he was confident about it. Those cuts, despite being numerous, were mere trifles to him and she knew it full well. Naruto's foot moved a step and Gurren was right on him to attack again because, as she knew, no matter which direction he was planning on moving in, he was coming straight for her. Shouten, Keshu Psycho Otage, Crystal Release, Growing Crystal Thorns. A large jagged branch of crystal grew out from a portion of the roof and speedily expanded towards Naruto, branching off in multiple directions that he would possibly dodge in when he chose to try and evade the technique. With the numerous portions of it moving in all directions unpredictably, Naruto was going to get cut to shreds without knowing which way he'd wind up getting it from. Naruto once more let fly with his machete, but instead of using it to clear cut through anything, as it wouldn't have worked in that scenario, he used it as a makeshift grappling hook and yanked on the chain attached to him under his arm warmer, forcing it to retract and reel him in before he could be impaled on multiple sides. The machete had impaled itself on the edge of the roof, and due to the lack of safety that the top of the mansion now held, Naruto wound up hanging over the edge by his chain and dropped to the ground of the property, waiting for Gurren to make her presence felt again. Many long, large pink crystals started falling from the sky and spiking themselves into the ground all around Naruto as he began to get mobile and dodge the crystalline javelins that seemed to keep falling and falling. Amid the many deadly projectiles, a large hexagonal shuriken flew through the air, independent of the javelins. Naruto saw it coming right before it reached him despite its flat, hard-to-see shape and the speed it had been thrown to reach. Naruto used his machete and the dense mineral grinded against the well-worn metal of his weapon of choice, driving him back over the ground before Naruto could swing his own body around and redirect it elsewhere. Mere misdirection. All of it. Gurren began weaving along the ground through the mess that her upright crystal javelins had made of the mansion grounds until she reached Naruto with her arm blade drawn back and ready to run him through. Naruto was barely able to turn around and prepare himself to retaliate, but Gurren simply burst into shards of crystal once he sighted her, a clone. That was annoying. Kami, was that what he had been doing to people for all of those years? He was an evil bastard. But now Gurren had him dead to rights and could finish him. He didn't even need to turn back around to know he was screwed. He could sense her there with his echolocation jutsu. That only left one option to try. His trump card to deal with Gurren, Shikamaru now. What? Gurren quickly ended her attempt to kill off Naruto mid-step. A large crystal lance formed around her right arm. She had forgotten about the boy's damned teammates. The most irksome of them was the smart-ass Nara. He had been lying in wait the whole time, just letting Naruto fight to lure her into a trap. Where could he have been? With a big grin the moment Naruto felt her hesitate, he wasted no time in whipping around immediately and grabbing her free arm with his nigh unbreakable grip, yanking her right into him as hard as he could, where he smashed his forehead right off of her face. Bam! The sudden stunning attack allowed Naruto to draw back his machete for a cleaving strike, though his head was a little fuzzy after the headbutt. The reason being that Gurren had her fully transparent crystal armor on as well. That stupid brat tricked her by making her think his backup had arrived and got close enough to actually headbutt her, hard enough to stagger her even with the armor on. It was absolutely humiliating. Gurren managed to block Naruto's machete shot with her crystal lance that shattered from the slash. Her now free hand grabbed Naruto's wrist to subdue his machete arm, thus the two of them were locked in a struggle with one of them controlling one of the other's arms with their own. The combat carried on to an equal stalemate as the two used their knees and feet to throw off the poise of their adversary's instep to compromise their balance. Again, nothing came of this and they were stuck locked together in a test of strength that Naruto was slowly winning. "Give it up," Naruto said as he started overpowering Gurren. She was no Tsunade by any stretch of the imagination, but she was strong for a woman. Not a chance that Gurren was going to let him go. They were danger close. If she let him go, all it would take from Naruto would be a sleight of hand and there would be a chance that he could fix her with some sort of crippling Fuinjutsu. She wasn't even thinking about letting him go and allowing him to use the Rasengan. She doubted her thin sheet of crystal armor would protect her too much from that attack. "To a scummy Konoha ninja like you? Ha! A shinobi of Otogaku never surrenders. We fight to the death." "Okay." Naruto grunted out as he crisscrossed his arms and turned a direct about face before shouting in effort. Much to her surprise, he jumped and hefted Gurren clean off of the ground before slinging her over his back and head and slamming her right into the ground with crushing force. "Ryuk. You think I need a weapon? My hands are my weapons." Just because she had subdued his ability to cut her temporarily didn't mean he still couldn't hurt her. He had 100 ways to do that with his entire body, and he had just shown her one. The armor didn't help her from feeling the consequences of the crashing slam, and all of the breath left Gurren's body upon impact. Her eyes went wide with panic when she saw a Rasengan begin to form in his left hand from where she was on her back. No way would she be able to deal with anything like that as she was. It would be an impossible feat to get hammered with such a jutsu in her prone position. Keshu, Rakeku Shuriken, Crystal, Hexagonal Shuriken. Shooting her arm up at Naruto, Gurren created several snowflake-looking crystal shuriken aimed at Naruto's neck and head. He leaned his head back out of the way to avoid a grisly death. The slight opening was all she needed to ensure her survival, and Gurren rolled up into a headstand in a mule kick that smashed Naruto right in the chin the moment he looked back down at her. He had been knocked up off of his feet, but he landed and kept standing. He'd been hit harder. Both Jiraiya and Tsunade had made certain of that for differing reasons. But he had missed his chance to finish Gurren off. She had gotten her distance from him without wasting a step. Apparently, even though she herself had said that the only way he could beat her was in close, she had seemed to underestimate just how quickly he could put an end to things if he caught her slipping. She was definitely not going to do that again. And the lying about Shikamaru or Ino was not going to work for him again, stroke of genius though it was. It worked for what he needed it for at the time, and that was all that really mattered. Gurren was hiding it well through her hateful glare, but she was sweating at this point. He had come within an eyelash of finishing her off. If she hadn't made him flinch with her sudden creation of crystal shuriken, they would have had to scrape her scattered brains up off of the ground come sunrise. Encasing him in crystal was useless in an attempt to kill him. She had tried it before and all he did was protect himself and break free with the Kyuubi's chakra. He wasn't such an easy out this time. Enough of that thinking. She had the experience edge. She was one of Orochimaru's elites. She could beat him. All she had to do was settle down and outthink him. He was just a blonde brute with some slick tricks. He couldn't have too many of them left up those arm-warmer sleeves of his to pull out and fight with. Moments before, inside of the mansion main house, Shikamaru finished tying up Gato as Ino applied the last sedative senbon to him to make sure he wouldn't wake up until they were rightly out at sea, where he wouldn't be able to stage any sort of hijinks to try and weasel his way out. A pair of female assassins lay defeated on the floor of the room wearing Otogakuer headbands. It hadn't taken anything more than a minute or so to dispatch them handily enough, and from there all they had to do was knock out Gato. It wasn't a bad thing that Ino took pleasure in that part in particular, was it? It was an act of mercy on their ears to put that shrieking banshee of a man under just to get him to stop yelling and begging off. Neither of them could blame him really. He wasn't a fighter, but did he have to be so annoying about it? Hefting a thoroughly bound and gagged Gato up over his shoulder, Shikamaru frowned as the mansion shook once again. He was focused on his and Ino's fight against Gato's personal protection detail and figured that all of the rumbling around the house was in his head that he needed to focus on not getting taken off of his shoulders at the time. Now he was definitely feeling something. We need to get back outside. It's retreat time. Yeah. Ino said, making sure that the Otogakuer pair of Kunoichi weren't going to be able to pursue even if they woke up anytime within the next 48 hours, it sounds like a war zone out there. Is Goldie-kun alright? She couldn't help but think of him fighting off a whole army of Otogakuer shinobi, even though she knew that was very far-fetched. He's probably the reason it sounds like that to begin with. Shikamaru said, shifting Gato on his shoulder with a grunt, come on. Let's dash. The mansion shook terribly and the pair ran outside into the hall to see that a large portion of the ceiling above had been torn off somehow and left the beams clearly visible as well as the night sky. Damn it, subtle as a rhino, Naruto. Restraint definitely isn't the word of the day tonight, is it? Ino asked no one in particular as the two of them traversed upwards to go out through the roof. Whatever Naruto was doing, he definitely wasn't sandbagging it. Or maybe he just couldn't. Upon being touched by the moonlight once more, Ino's eyes widened at the completely ruined roof that was basically non-existent at this point. But there was no Naruto in sight. Shikamaru tapped her on the arm and pointed towards the center grounds at the backside of the mansion and came upon the sight of two fast-moving combatants chasing one another on the flat ground around many crystals that were impaled in the earth. Crap. Shikamaru said with a frown evident on his face, Naruto's fighting Gurren? What is she even doing back in this town? Didn't she get redeployed anywhere else? Talk about returning to the scene of a crime. Gurren's eyes noticed them standing on the roof and saw Gato with them. Of course he didn't come alone. As loath as she was to protect the slimy toad, she couldn't let them get away with an affiliate of Otogakuer. Who knew what sensitive state information that undisciplined bastard was privy to? But Naruto noticed this as well, and placed his body between Gurren and the main mansion building as they continued to fight. She wasn't going to get Gato back, not while he had anything to say about it. And the two continued their fast-paced ballet of violence amongst each other. Ino quickly brandished a handful of senbon, narrowing her eyes on the scene before them. We should help him then. She can't handle the three of us at once. Not a chance. She stopped when she remembered something important and shot her eyes towards Gato's unmoving frame on Shikamaru's shoulder. One of us has to take him though. Shikamaru knew that Ino wished to fight, if only because she felt that she had something to prove. And to be honest, they could have used the help if only to make it so that they could leave as quickly as possible before the signal to evacuate went up. But there was a chance that they wouldn't be able to get Gato out even if that was their mission, and aside from that, he and Naruto were more accustomed to working together than any combination of the two boys and Ino at that point. He had a bit of a solution though, but it was a crappy one. Ino, can you interrogate Gato here? Surprised by the sudden request, Ino almost balked at it in response. Here? I mean, I could, but it's going to take a while by myself. especially without the mind-reading amplification machine. It's not a quick process. That was why they were to capture someone and take them away on the ship to begin with. A decent interrogation would take time, and that wasn't something that they had in spades at the moment. It wasn't a technique that one could use under fire either. Ino would need her focus to dive into Gato's subconscious, and she wouldn't be in any sort of position to defend herself while doing it. Certainly not something that could be done on the front lines of a battlefield. Fine then. Shikamaru passed Gato off onto Ino, who took him while Shikamaru shook his arms out. Take Gato to the docks where Enko-sensei and Yamato Taijo are. We'll be right behind you. All of us can't stay and fight this time. I know. I'm an information specialist. Ino said, more or less consenting to the idea. The intel is more important than some pride of mine in a fight. You two had better hurry up, she said before choosing to leave the mansion in the hills and begin making her way back to town. We'd better finish this in 5 minutes. Shikamaru thought to himself as he saw Gurren break off from fighting Naruto to try and stop Ino. Not a chance. Kagenui no Jutsu, Shadow Sewing Jutsu. From Shikamaru's body, shadows materialized in the thinner shape of extending threads that rushed out towards Gurren along the ground to try and stop her. In mid-motion, Gurren saw the shadows coming along the ground and gazed upon them with some interest. So he can make his shadow that much harder to avoid now, can he? And it was faster as well. But it was still on the ground, and she could dodge it just as aptly as she did the first time. Until the tips of the sharp shadows leapt off of the ground and effectively became a three-dimensional attack that was meant to stab her instead of capture her movement. Because she was already moving through the air with the momentum of her jump, Shikamaru's shadow threads stabbed against her. But it wasn't good enough for him because he didn't feel his shadow tendrils take hold. That damn crystal armor of hers. He had to stab her so that he could sew her stuck to detain her, or kill her. Whichever one was easier. Thank goodness that kid's shadows weren't strong enough to bust the crystal armor. That was all Gurren could think to herself. But then there was of course still Naruto that had been given a golden ticket to attack by his partner's intervention. Who wouldn't cash in on such a thing? Certainly not Naruto, with his wind-enhanced blade weapon. He was a damnably well-noted opportunist of the highest magnitude. Naruto took a clear, wide-open swing of his machete at Gurren's back, only to find that he had cut through a crystal doll that had been made in her image. She shed her crystal armor and Kawarami'd with it. Of course she did. Why wouldn't she have seen his attack coming? A 7-year-old would have seen it coming. But from the blood on his machete, Naruto thought to himself that the most obvious method of attack could still get results. Sorry Shika. Just a half a second faster. They hadn't been directly countered yet though. Which way did Ino-chan go? This is why I hate fighting the good Otagakuer ninjas. Shikamaru complained as both he and Naruto went off in the direction that Ino ran towards, off of the mansion grounds and back towards the town. Their troublesome gambits throw off my plans. Probably something they pick up over time from Orochimaru. Hey, they need some good traits to have them break out of the mindless drone/cannon fodder level of being an Oto shinobi. Still, not particularly good in this case, because both Naruto and Shikamaru didn't need to be master tacticians to know where Gurren was going. Especially when they saw a small trail carved out in the ground made up of mashed little chips of crystal mixed in with the torn dirt and grass, reminiscent of a tire track. With Enko and Yamato Digarashi port harbors. That is seriously one useful hunter nin. Enko said aloud from her place looking over the side of their modest-sized vessel. Her reason for being rather impressed was because with the exception of a clear and easy-to-use path for the ship that she and Yamato had commandeered, every other ship that could be used to pursue was trapped by thick ice. These kids are starting to make me feel old. Haku had almost completely frozen off any chance for them being pursued. Yamato had to agree to say the very least. The Hayaton Kekai Genkai is versatile, he said, and as someone that had a pretty damn high-level bloodline limit technique himself, that was high praise. It's kind of why the whole anti-bloodline sentiment took off so easily in Kiri all those years ago. They made the people without them feel inadequate and threatened. Turning around with a dry look on her face, Enko pointed at the portions of ocean that were frozen solid, trapping the vast amount of ships there at Digarashi port until it melted. Seeing that would make me feel safe if anything, knowing that it was on my side. How'd the Brat Brigade even beat Haku the first time? A soft set of footsteps landing on the deck alerted Anko and Yamato to Asuma's presence, and on his back he had Haku held up piggyback. That was strange. Haku didn't seem to be the type to allow herself to burden others on her team. As he walked over he already knew what his colleagues were going to ask him, and Asuma explained before anyone could inquire. She was thorough. Thorough enough that she had to take a soldier pill to keep going. Of course, because that had to use up a horrendous amount of chakra, she probably hasn't even fully recovered from the state she was in when she made it to Konoha. I'm fine. Haku said, her face still concealed by her mask. At least it was until Anko walked over to her and took it off to find her face paler than normal and sweating. Honestly, I can still help. Shaking her head, Anko took Haku off of Asuma's hands and proceeded to carry her inside to find a spot for her to rest. You're going to take some downtime now. Or do you want to be completely exhausted by the time we reach Mizu no Kuni? That's where you're going to be needed. The purple-haired Kunoichi reasoned as they headed on in. Putting too much effort into just the first leg of the mission? Well, for someone that had no problem being the willing tool of another person, it didn't seem to be that unbelievable. That was a good mindset for one-shot missions, but for S-rank missions with multiple parts to it, that kind of operating could be treacherous. How many S-rank missions had his team been on again? Damn it. Asuma palmed his face hard and turned towards Yamato. We can call for my team now, right? I think the quicker they get here the better. Yamato nodded and unsealed what looked to be a long bamboo tube that he slammed against the ground. From the top of it a bolt of lightning shot out of it into the sky, visible from anywhere in Digarashi port. How much time do you think it'll take? I have to give them 2 minutes and then I'm casting off. Yamato explained with a frown, otherwise we'll have Otagaku enemies all over us, making your sabotage mission worthless. We can't sit here trying to defend the ship for them until sunup. He and Asuma began to prepare the ship for a quick departure. Luckily by intention Yamato had obtained a ship that would be easy to get ready. They have standard procedure memorized in case they get left behind, don't they? They won't get left behind. Asuma assured him as they got to work. Elsewhere in Digarashi port, Ino had cleared the hills where Gato's mansion had been situated with the little man himself over her shoulder the entire way. Kami, why couldn't he pick somewhere closer to live? Ino thought to herself, I am so out of active mission shape, being stuck in TNI all day. But if nothing else, she had covered significant ground on the way back through the village and had managed to avoid any unwanted run-ins with the enemy ninja populace. That was something that she attributed to having already been in the town for a significant mission in the past. Hopefully this time around it ended better. That was then and this was now though, and thinking about such things would do nothing to ensure that she reached the harbor with Gato in tow. Especially when she saw the hard-to-miss shot of lightning streak up through the sky from just over the water. That was the cue to get gone. As if those in control of time and fate were getting a kick out of Team 10's situation, Ino found herself deposited back around the shipyard. The same chunk of territory in the town where things had come to a close the last time. The sound of quite a ruckus alerted her beforehand to any trouble, and it was a good thing as well because Ino was then forced to dodge for dear life when a nearby building wall was smashed through with reckless abandon. It could have been infinitely worse. Found you, princess. Gurren had plowed through the wall while standing within a jagged wheel comprised of crystal. You did a pretty good job of avoiding those trash sentries all over town, but I'm not the absolute bottom of the barrel. It's easy to consider where you were going to go. No way would you be fool enough to try and escape overland on your own. Gurren's eyes twinkled seemingly in delight at the fact that she definitely seemed to be alone and had Gato right there over her shoulder. You had an exit strategy. Oh, someone needs to give you a gold star for figuring that one out all by yourself. Ino jabbed sarcastically, much to Gurren's displeasure. Not particularly the best idea for someone in Ino's situation, but being demure wasn't going to stop Gurren from trying to kill her. Thus being a bitch was preferable by her standards. Gurren's crystal wheel shattered of her own volition and she started walking towards Ino, trying to scope out the best way to deal with the little nuisance before she could turn and run somehow again. Ino couldn't fight because she was holding up Gato and only had one arm free at best. You know, I just don't get why you Konoha idiots keep trying to pick fights against Otagaku. We've made you look foolish time and time again and you still just keep on running your heads against the wall. Is it merely because you know by now that Orochimaru-sama commands us? Hokage-sama isn't petty like that, even though from what I've heard Orochimaru is a nasty guy that screwed our village over. Ino said as her eyes darted around to look for some kind of opening to take advantage of. She'd take anything at that point. Just keep Gurren talking, your village steps on too many toes. You prolonged a civil war and you're still taking advantage of the devastation it caused in Mizu no Kuni. You're going to start another war somewhere else if you keep doing things like that. It's the faults of the idiots in Kiri that let Orochimaru-sama too close. Gurren explained with a smirk, but don't worry your pretty little head about it. It's not your problem anymore. Die. As Gurren lunged forward, Ino evaded away from her and shifted Gato from her back to hold him up in front of herself at the pursuing Gurren like a human shield. She saw a change in Gurren's eyes as the woman got close and saw Ino's intention to avoid her attack. Not a bad idea. She figured that since Gato was a VIP, Gurren wouldn't risk his health. She was his bodyguard after all. But that was incorrect. Gurren was not in Degarashi port as a part of Gato's security detail. She was there to merely oversee the dispatching and the arrival of ships that contained Orochimaru's interests such as his experiment subjects. Gato had nothing to do with anything involving Gurren's mission. She didn't care about him at all. Besides, Orochimaru didn't need him anymore anyway. He had gotten everything he needed out of Gato Corporation. At this point Oto and Gato Corporation were closely interwoven enough that anyone beneath Gato's station in the company could be used as a mere puppet figure under Orochimaru's command. That was the eventual plan anyway, this was just speeding it up a bit. The fool actually thought that his money was keeping him as an important figure to Orochimaru, as if money couldn't change hands easily. Shouten, Suishaoro no Jutsu, Crystal Release, Jade Crystal Prison. Once Ino and Gato were within hand's reach of Gurren, Ino saw the devilish smirk on the woman's face and mentally cursed. She had no choice but to let go of Gato or pay the ultimate price, which left the man to the fate of being encased entirely in crystal. Sometimes it was easy to underestimate just what many of these people were willing to compromise in regards to morals to win. She stared at Gurren standing next to the crystallized Gato, still smirking before she punched the statue and shattered it entirely. Gato's body went right along with it, disintegrating with the crystal particles. Oops. She disingenuously said, seeming to take pleasure in the look of anger on Ino's face, I'm sorry, did you need him for something? Didn't you? Not really. He served his purpose. We were just looking for a good time to take him out. At least now we can blame it on you if it comes to it. How callous. Allies were expendable and allegiances changed like people changed clothes in the elemental nations, but really? Just like that? The second it became a tad bit inconvenient to have him as an ally anymore she was cleared to kill him, and she'd get away with it? And she had the nerve to feel like the superior ninja because of it. If Ino didn't have to run away, she would have stopped to fight just out of principle. Actually, Gurren was probably going to make her stop and fight regardless. Right on time, Gurren chose to attack her next and finish her off as intended, but at least Ino's hands were now free to fight. You made me fail my mission, bitch. Ino shouted as she made hand seals and prepared to attack a charging Gurren. Before the two could clash though, Ino without warning phased through the ground. A thoroughly confused Gurren was even more so when from the exact same place in the ground a grinning Naruto leapt out with a blue spiraling orb of chakra in hand. There was absolutely no time to react. Rasengan, spiraling sphere. The sound of shattering was from the front of Gurren's armor being destroyed by Naruto's Rasengan as it was slammed directly into her chest. The force of the jutsu slammed her back through the air straight through the wall of a warehouse. The confusion didn't end with just Gurren. Ino blinked in confusion as she emerged up from the ground yards away from where she had originally been. She turned around and saw Shikamaru breathing a sigh of relief with his hands held in a strange hand seal different from his normal shadow possession seal. Shika? What just happened? Kawarikage no Jutsu, shadow replacement jutsu. I hate that jutsu. Shikamaru said as he stood up from his position, it looked like you needed the help though. Ino nodded and saw Naruto standing on the pile of crystal debris from Gurren's cruel execution of an equally cruel man. She wasn't going to shed any tears over it, but damn it, Gurren really messed things up. Gurren killed him. It was my fault. Sure, It was either let her freeze Gato or wind up being crystallized along with him, but that didn't clear her of responsibility. Able to hear Ino's admission of guilt, Naruto just cracked his knuckles as he stared at the hole that Gurren had created with her body after his Rasengan. Then we'll just catch her first, he said, as if it were that simple. Pointing at the sky in the direction of the ocean, Ino raised a point of importance. Goldie-kun, the signal went off. We need to leave. This'll only take a minute, Naruto assured her. They weren't going to fail the only assignment given to them and botch the first mission Team 10 had been handed since its reformation. Ninja Guardians couldn't fail their missions, or the worst could happen to the entire country. Well, that mindset carried over to that moment too, because the home of a friend needed help, I promise. You wish. Shouten, Hashao Kuryuo, Crystal Release, Tearing Crystal Falling Dragon. 4 large dragons comprised of crystal broke through the warehouse walls surrounding the trio of Chunin, with Gurren riding on the head of one of them. They couldn't dodge them all and they couldn't defend themselves from them all. Each and every one of them were annoying for their own reasons, and they had failed their mission. The only thing left for her to do was finish them off. Maybe if she delivered their heads back to Konoha, that would get the intended message she wanted to express across to them. Gritting his teeth, Naruto was about to see just how big of a boom it would take to break those dragons down, but he was quickly reminded that he wasn't fighting by himself anymore. Shikamaru sighed in exasperation and rubbed both of his wrists over the sleeves of his open black jacket. Right then, he thrust his arms out in 2 separate directions, and from beneath his sleeves shot a pair of blades. It made Gurren wonder what he was aiming at, because they went nowhere near her, even the one that flew her way. But she found that she was unable to control her dragon or her own body. No way. I was watching. He never made his shadow even budge again. Kagemon e Shuriken no Jutsu, Shadow Imitation Shuriken Jutsu, ... Shikamaru said, smiling slightly at how things managed to shake out for them. Thank goodness he took the whole chakra-infused blades thing from Naruto and Asuma. It used way less chakra to catch his enemies even if he only had 2 shots. Now finish. With pleasure, Ino said as she brandished a small pellet that she threw right at Gurren's head. The immobile woman was unable to do anything as it burst on her face and sent blue gas right into her breathing passages. There was nothing she could do but glare hatefully at the lot of them as she began to go under slowly but surely. Nighty-night now. Her eyes finally drooped closed and her crystal dragons collapsed, sending Gurren falling to the ground. Naruto blinked and rubbed the back of his neck as he looked around. Wow, that was easy. Infinitely easier than taking Gurren on one-on-one had been. Of course it was. Ino replied matter-of-factly as she started pricking Gurren with separate poisonous senbon to try and keep her sedated until they could properly bind her. That's teamwork, Goldie-kun. Thanks for saving my ass, you guys, she said with a brilliant smile as Naruto stayed away from the dangerous enemy Kunoichi until he was sure she was out, and while Shikamaru placed his special blades back onto the wrist attachments beneath his sleeves. It's definitely an ass worth saving, Naruto mumbled to himself just out of Ino's earshot. Shikamaru heard him though, and shook his head at his friend's idiocy. As they prepared to head for the water, Naruto then scowled at the sound of forthcoming enemies. Great, he said to himself, we didn't take that long that they caught up, did they? They sort of did. But even with the method that they had used to defeat Gurren, they hadn't caused too much of a ruckus in town. They could probably get away, but they had to go right then or they were going to be in serious trouble. Taking the initiative for once, Shikamaru picked Gurren up off of the ground and hoisted her over his shoulders as he and Ino took off to try and make themselves scarce. They could follow where the signal to leave came from easily enough, and now they even had a captive. One that would admittedly be harder to break than Geto, but one that would more than likely have better information. Yeah, you guys go, Naruto said, reaching through his equipment rapidly as his teammates led the way and left. I'll be right there. On board the confiscated ship, Asuma's fingertips drummed the railing of the ship rhythmically as he peered out impatiently towards shore. The last preparations to leave were being made by the older team members from Konoha, and it had been past 2 minutes since the signal went up. These kids are going to be the death of me, man, Asuma, an amused Anko pointed out as she leaned against the same railing as they waited. I remember back when you hated kids. Right before you had this team, as a matter of fact. And now look at you. You're taking care of foreign teenagers. You worry over your old genin squad like a mother hen, and you're even having your own brat in a few months. He shot a treacherous look her way that she just shrugged off. You really think you've kept it that good of a secret to where nosy people don't know something? He of course assumed that Anko was referring to herself when she spoke of nosy people. And if she did indeed know, he only had one thing to say, well then where's my gift? Anko scoffed and gave Asuma a few pats on the cheek. The to-be mother is the one that's supposed to get the gift's smokestack. But I'll tell you what. Your gift is me having the good grace to not tell the entire village that you and Kurenai are more than special friends. As if everyone with half a brain didn't know already. That's a crappy gift. I'm taking it back. A bark of laughter left Anko at Asuma's reply. Yamato looked out towards the warehouse-laden harbor as he dropped down from the mast after finishing his last assignment prior and made his way to the ship's wheel to begin steering it. We can't wait any longer. I could see it while preparing the sails, they're swarming over the harbor. Neither Asuma nor Anko really argued as they couldn't, but before anything else, both Shikamaru and Ino's feet landed on the deck and with another guest in tow as well. It was one that both Anko and Asuma knew because of the outburst from Orochimaru's first apprentice. What the fuck? I thought you were getting Gato, not Otagakure's resident queen psychopath. She killed Gato. Shikamaru said informatively, unceremoniously dropping Gurren onto the deck now that he didn't have to carry her anymore. We needed to take someone useful or we would have been behind the 8 ball to start the mission, and Naruto was fighting her anyway so we just all jumped her and took her. She wasn't expecting us to have even half of the techniques that we did. He modestly made it sound so simple. A lot of positioning was needed to work out the way that everything ended up and the planning from the moment that he switched out Naruto and Ino's positions with his shadow to the second he pinned Gurren's shadow with his blades had been painstakingly set up. In her chase to catch Ino, Gurren couldn't have given them an easier area to trap her in either. Seriously, in a junction of warehouses? Consider that capture gift wrapped. She threw Shikamaru a softball for that one. With the ship finally moving out of its placement in the port, Yamato walked over and picked Gurren up with one hand by the rope tied around her waist with a satisfied look on his face. I'll take that. We'll put her in the hold and restrain her for Yamanaka-san to interrogate once we leave. While he was pleased at how things had worked out, there was one thing left to worry about. Where is Naruto? A decent question, as Asuma would have figured Naruto to be faster than Ino and Shikamaru if it came to them having to race to the ship, especially since Shikamaru had been carrying a prisoner at the time. And then a chain of explosions started moving through the shoreside warehouses to deter any enemies from venturing any further towards the ocean, especially with the large pluming cloud of ashes that shot out from them. From the fire of the blasts, a rather bulky figure flew from the harbor and made a crash landing on the deck. The attentive group from Konoha flinched at the landing but looked again to see a very large orange toad bigger than a full-grown human wearing an open blue vest. He was slightly singed, probably from the series of explosions, but he was otherwise alright. Yo. Gamakaki said, lifting a webbed hand to wave at the lot of them, long time no see for most of you jerks. That was Naruto's favorite toad summon creature. Ino would have known that brazen way of speaking anywhere. The last time she'd had seen him he'd been a little puny thing. Puberty must have hit more than just them if Gamakaki looked like that now. Where's Goldie? From Gamakaki's back, a soot-covered hand was raised and waved to reveal Naruto, who slid off of Gamakaki's back. He was covered in ashes and coughed a few times. The special explosive tags need more work. Thanks, Kichi. I wasn't going to be able to jump that by myself, he said as he pulled his goggles from off of his eyes back up onto his forehead. It seemed that the area around his eyes was the only place that wasn't absolutely filthy. You owe me, Naruto, Gamakaki said, as he watched Naruto shake the soot off of himself. You had me test out those stupid tags back on the mountain. Do you know how much of a mess those ashes make? If you tested it, then you should have told me how they blew up before I used them here. I thought they worked the way they were supposed to when you never answered me back about M. Naruto yelled back at his most familiar toad. Now I need to wash and change my clothes to get this crap off. Gamakaki flicked his tongue out at Naruto and slapped him across the face before gagging once he retracted his tongue. Bleh. Damn it, that tasted gross. That tasted like licking the ashes off of a cigarette. Well, that was because it was basically what he did, along with some toad oil as well that Naruto used to mix the concoction. Naruto cackled in response to the backfired prank and gave Gamekaki a few victorious pats on the back. I'm covered in my own ashes, dumbass. What did you expect? Alright, go home. Whatever, you jackass, don't get yourself, the cute blonde little sweetheart, or your lazy teammate killed. I like them. Later. Canceling his own summoning in a puff of smoke, Gamekaki vanished back to the mountain that he and the others of his ilk called home. Your summons really don't respect you, kid. Anko commented, poking at the sticky ashen mess that was Naruto. I thought I walked the line with mine, but I think if your toads were snakes, I think they would have tried to eat you by now. Nah, the toads are cool. Naruto said, swatting the Takubitsu Jounin's hand away from him. It's not just me though. I think they treat Ero-sensei like a bigger idiot. They don't take him seriously at all. I get respect from most of them except for Gamekaki and Gamabunta. It was quite noticeable by that time that they were out in the open ocean and hadn't been pursued yet. Haku's little tactic of freezing the outlets of the harbor worked like a charm. Ships weren't getting out of there for a while, and with the panic accidentally caused by Naruto blowing up a few warehouses, it would probably disguise their departure for a short time as well. As they sailed away from the burning and smoking seaside of Degarashi port, it was next on to the islands that comprised the lands of Mizu no Kuni, and whatever nasty surprises awaited them upon their arrival. A short reprieve at sea, and then on to the next challenge. They were all quite certain that there would be more than a fair share of those once they made it. Good work so far, everyone. Asuma said in Yamato's stead, as the leader of the entire team could currently be found down in the hold restraining their captive. You altered your plan once the parameters of your mission changed, and depending on what Ino can get out of our new friend Gurren, it might have been for the better. He gave Shikamaru a pat on the shoulder and was about to do the same for Naruto when he saw how much of a mess he was. Take a shower and put on some clean clothes, Naruto. Bah. Naruto spat as he waved Asuma off and walked inside to do as requested. It wasn't like he didn't want to be clean as well. It took a moment of just standing around before Ino subtly tried to follow him in, failing as Anko, Asuma, and Shikamaru spotted her before she reached the door inside. Noticing all of the eyes on her, Ino turned around slowly and smacked her lips as she pointed toward the depths of the ships. I'm just going to go help Goldie-kun find somewhere to clean himself up. Then I'm going to sleep. In separate bedrolls, please. Anko chimered in with her cheek in her palm. We're not running that kind of ship here. Oh, messing with the kiddies was so much fun. What great downtime entertainment while on a mission like that one. A raised middle finger from Ino was the response, flipping her ponytail over her back as she went inside. So what if she was probably only going to use that situation to try and see what Naruto was working with underneath most of those clothes after 3 years? There wasn't anything wrong with that. For all she knew, he'd do the exact same thing if given the opportunity. Omake, Guardian Days 2. 3 months after Naruto and Shikamaru's acceptance. The training for the Ninja Guardians turned out to be just as demanding as had been anticipated. Increased physical training was PAR for the course, along with the technique training required for each member. Psychological torment was also quite commonplace, but that wasn't supposed to be a part of the intended curriculum for new recruits. It just happened. A lot of the times not even from the senior members of the team. The Imperial Doctor was a major contributor to most of it. You certainly rolled back into town fast. Naruto said with a grin as he sat on the observation bed inside of Tsunade's rather spacious office. Again. I thought you were never supposed to be here. In Tsunade's own famous last words, just how sick or hurt could a bunch of straight-laced, neat freak nobles get? The answer was of course more than had been first assumed by the legendary ninja medic. It turned out that nobles, especially the young ones, seemed to like dangerous situations or enjoyed putting themselves in harm's way for a rush in the middle of their largely boring lives. And she would get summoned back to the court for anything above a boo-boo level injury. She had been back 8 times in the last 3 months for at least 3 to 4 days each time. Oh, hush up, Naruto. Tsunade grumbled as she filled out the last dregs of paperwork, describing her last recorded patient's idiotic injury, a young teenager's attempted ninja activities without supervision or direction. He attempted to jump rooftops like the Ninja Guardians and failed miserably after slipping on the tile of his intended landing zone, the treatment prescribed, and her own personal comments on the matter. Moron, should be kept on a leash for the foreseeable future until he shows some maturity. Aren't you supposed to be training? Lunch break. Naruto held up an empty cup of ramen that he then shot into the trash can closest to Tsunade's desk. Like a bad sport, Tsunade swatted away the container with enough aim and force that it flew back across the room and bounced off of Naruto's forehead. "Oi, that was going in," he said, not even flinching. "Where's Shizune? Out doing the legwork for today." Tsunade ran a hand through her hair with a desperate sigh. That was exactly why she hated being called back to the capital, because then any little sniffle would be the responsibility of her and Shizune. It was flattering because it was basically the noble population saying that every other doctor was completely inadequate when compared to the greatness of Tsunade, but it was still annoying. "Do you want to do me a favor?" "Not unless that favor gets me out of evening training with the Guardians. I could put you through that wall. I'm sure that would buy you a full day off of training." "That's not how you ask for a favor, Tsunade-bachan." If they hadn't been alone, he definitely would have been going through the wall for calling her that, but as it was, no one heard it but the two of them. Thus she let it slide this time. "Please help me, you demmed brat." Now that was better. When Tsunade asked him for things without the added threat of bodily harm in the instance of his refusal of her request, he felt far more inclined to assist her. The brat part didn't even matter to him because he had been called brat so often he automatically turned his head when he heard anyone random yell it in the streets. "What do you need me to do?" Naruto asked, hopping off of the examination table and walking over to his fellow blonde for whatever she wanted. "Is it something hard?" "It's something that involves you anyway," Tsunade told him as she got up from her desk and rolled her neck out to rid it of the stiffness. "That breast size of hers did damage of its own over the years. I need you to inform all of your Ninja Guardian comrades that I'm going to need to run a physical on all of them before 5 p.m. And make sure to drag your little lazy friend here so I don't have to do this tomorrow." As long as she was there, she might as well get one of the responsibilities of her job out of the way and do her routine checkups of the Ninja Guardians. There was no time like the present. A nod came from Naruto as the two walked towards her door. "Right. Go get everybody and tell them they need their checkups done." "Got it." "Easy." Tsunade opened it up for Naruto to leave, but she raised an eyebrow when he just made 3 clones to retrieve his teammates. "There. Done. I can see that. How convenient for him. Maybe she could use him as a medical gopher more often?" Tsunade pointed her thumb back towards the examination table, indicating that Naruto was to go over there. "Alright then, since you're here already, you're first. Ditch the orange clothes so we can get this over with." The door was shut to preserve Naruto's modesty. "Do I have to get any shots?" Naruto asked, shedding his gear as requested to leave himself in his boxers without a second guess. So much for caring about his own modesty. She was a doctor though, so it was cool. "We'll see. Now wait here while I go make copies of these forms to send off," Tsunade said, glaring hatefully at the stack of forms in her hands. Even when she shut the door behind herself to leave Naruto alone in the office, he could still hear her muttering angrily all the way down the hall. With nothing to occupy himself in the meantime while waiting for Tsunade to finish making copies, something that he thought would take a while, when he heard a crash from down the hall in the direction that she went, Naruto just leaned back on the examination bed and tried to get in a quick snooze. This failed when he got the memories from his clones back. The ones sent out to retrieve Shikamaru and Sadeo just dispelled like normal following a routine delivery of a message. The one sent to Kotoko's room to do the same though, not so much. The way Naruto's clone worded the need for the checkup, Kotoko took it as Naruto being the one endeavoring to administer the examination then and there. This was something the semi-insane Kunoichi apparently had no issues with when she shrugged her shoulders in response and casually disrobed of her kimono on the spot. Needless to say, Naruto's clone had no idea what to do, and it merely froze in place staring at her for well over 4 minutes before finally having slowly lost enough blood through its nose to register a dispel. When Tsunade walked back into the room, she was confused by the fact that Naruto was unconscious with blood drying from his nose to his chest. Also confusing her was why his boxers looked a touch tighter than they should have otherwise. Chapter 47, Island in the Fog. "Ah, home sweet home, what a dump," a blue-skinned man said with a grin on his face. The telltale black cloak with red clouds covered his body and the straw hat of Akatsuki sat on his head as he walked through the misty Mizu no Kuni Island roads with his partner at his side. I still say you should have just let me kill all of the fools on that ship we took, Itachi-san. There was no need for such a drastic act, Kisame. Itachi said, his sherry non-eyes visible underneath the brim of his hat. With his high-raised collar, it was the only portion of him that was really visible beneath his attire. My genjutsu more than aptly handled it. While things are going to get very busy for Akatsuki soon, it would be best to keep ourselves off the radar for as long as possible still. Kisame let out an irritated sigh but agreed nonetheless, yeah, real cloak and dagger. That's going to be really possible when we're fighting with a gigantic death turtle when we finally track it down. He said sarcastically. Itachi's eyes panned towards the larger former Kiri ninja upon detecting the obvious skepticism in his voice. You don't believe that the Sanbi is still inside of its Jinchuriki somewhere in hiding? There had been no word on the fate of the current Jinchuriki in 2 years since the war in Kirigakure was still going on. You really believe that Orochimaru has taken him the way Sasori figured from what his spy told him? Do the math. Kisame chuckled in return. The simple fact that we don't know where Yagura is, knowing what you know about the previous Mizukage position, should tell you all that you need to know as far as if he still has the Sanbi in him. Yagura is long dead, I can assure you of that. People getting sprited away was not uncommon ever since the Civil War and Otogakure's involvement. It was usually people of notably interesting skill as well. That was a point that Itachi had to concede to the shark-like man, true enough. Knowing the cause of Yagura's instability during the latter portion of his rule, it would be obvious to say that if his location isn't known to us, that would mean that unsavory characters have their hands on him or the Sanbi. Kisame reached up over his back and drummed his fingertips on the handle of the massive bandaged sword he carried with him in an impatient manner. So do we have a plan of action? A nod came from the covered-up figure of Uchiha Itachi to confirm that they did. Scour the countryside until we run across an unlucky troop of Otogakure invaders and force them to give us what we need to know to begin infiltrating strongholds. Kisame just remained silent as they kept walking, but Itachi knew that he was unhappy with how they were going to go about working their angle. There clearly wasn't enough bloodshed in that equation for him. And then you can begin destroying them. I guess. You see, Itachi-san, that's the thing with us. It's a real give-slash-take relationship here. We get along well. With the Kiri relief team, on board commandeered ship. Gurren really didn't have a good night's sleep being stuck down in the hold of a ship that had been captured by the people that had kicked her ass. To rub salt in that wound, the people that had kicked her ass had been a team of brats that 3 years ago she gleefully put the boots to. And to pour alcohol on that salted wound, not only had they taken a ship, they had taken her too. All she knew was that whoever restrained her did a damn good job of it. She had been put in a wooden stockade with wood coverings over her hands tight so that she couldn't make hand seals. Also, whether it was intentional or not, there was a leak dripping right on top of her head. Sadistic fuckers, that was a good one. The door to the hold opened up and in walked the blonde girl in purple that she had almost killed in Degarashi port. Ah, wasn't she adorable with that serious look on her face like she was going to do something? Oh, I get someone to take my breakfast order on this cruise? Konoha is really nice to their prisoners. What, do you charm information out of them? If Ibiki was here and you said that to him, you'd have screws in your tits by now. Ino said matter-of-factly as she walked closer to Gurren and stooped down in front. Alright, it's early and I'm cranky, nobody is awake to make any breakfast, so I'm going to be hungry really soon, and you killed the guy that would have been easy for me to break. So to be nice, I'll only ask you once to cooperate. Otherwise I'm just going to do my thing, and I promise you're going to feel really violated when I'm done. I'm so sure, princess. Gurren said with a disbelieving smirk. If you're going to do it, you should just hop to it. I'm very busy, as you can see. The two just stared at each other for a few empty seconds at that point. See? Look how busy I am. I'm swamped. You're not scared? Ino said, pacing circles around Gurren while making a show of stretching her arms and pushing her chest out. Honestly, I don't blame you. I mean, I'm not Ibiki. I don't do all of the screwed up stuff that he does. I mean, I learned how to do some of it because I had to, but I don't do it in my own interrogations after I learned how to do something else, because I'm a Yamanaka. She finished with a grin and Gurren's eyes widened. Surprise. Damn it, she should have seen that coming. When it rained it poured, and why wouldn't it be an interrogation specialist Yamanaka there to poke around in her head? That made just as much sense as anything else at the moment. Still, Gurren had a strong front. Nothing had been divulged yet. I've got mental blocks that you'll never get through. You think Orochimaru-sama would send his elites out without making sure we had a preventive measure on us to keep us from spilling state secrets? That's interesting. Ino said, reaching into her supply pouch as she idly continued to walk around Gurren, because I'm also a poison specialist, and I've got drugs. She then threw a senbon that hit Gurren right in the forehead. Ow, bitch. Great, now she had a needle in her forehead. And it paralyzed her body. No struggling was at all possible. I'm not as good as Daddy with this jutsu, but that's what the poison is for. Ino admitted as she set a hand on top of Gurren's head and pulled out a small red orb that she squeezed in her fist until it broke in front of Gurren's face. The gas that emitted from the orb was breathed in by Gurren and dissipated into the air. You see, he can work past most mental defenses. It's really impressive. I can't yet, so I cheat. It's kind of like bringing a set of lock-picking tools to break into a house. I hate you. Seethed the red-lipped Otoku no Ichi as her eyes glared up at Ino past the palm of her hand. I'm going to get out of here and kill every last one of you on this tub. I don't care. Ino shrugged as she shut her eyes and began focusing on her link to Gurren's mind. Now I hope you're comfortably numb for your pending blackout, because this is still going to take forever to find what I want. Her love of gossip and secrets were the main reason that Ino didn't outright hate her job. The time it took to sift through someone's memories, especially by herself, she absolutely despised it. On the deck. It had been all quiet since the trouble at Degarashi Port the previous night. As early as it was, as the sun had barely risen into the sky at that point, it was time to get up since Ino had seen fit to rise and shine. While Naruto wanted to spend a little bit of time while there was time to be had catching up some more with his lovely Yamanaka teammate, she had gone right to work on trying to yank some good information out of Gurren after getting herself prepared for the day. There had been barely enough time to give her a good morning after she had come out. In return, she just yawned one back in response and fondly ran a hand over his cheek before going down to the hold, all the while mumbling complaints about how she was going to be down there all day at least. Once Naruto was awake, there wasn't really anything that could get him back to sleep, so he just decided to sit up on deck and smoke a cigarette while waiting for anyone else to wake up. Footsteps eventually reached his ears from behind and he extended his senses to get the signature of who it was. I didn't think you'd wake up anytime soon if you didn't have Tashika. I blame you. Shikamaru said, leaning forward on the railing of the ship that Naruto was sitting on. Well, yesterday went well, even with the whole trouble of you blowing up the entire warehouse front to cover our escape. I think it did too. Naruto agreed, blowing smoke into the air and manipulating it into patterns with his chakra. I mean, other than the warehouses, we didn't annihilate the town at all. I knew my new tags would make fire-free blasts that burned. And you said it would never work. He said with a smug grin. Yeah, you're a prodigy of demolition. Shikamaru said in a patronizing fashion before looking at the ocean ahead of them. So, elephant in the room that we've been ignoring for the last 6 months, do you think you're ready for what you left to get ready for? An exhaled breath of smoke from Naruto took the form of Konoha's leaf insignia in the air before dissipating into nothing. To be Hokage? Yeah, sure. I'll just wait for Hokage to step down and I'll get a body of work behind me. And if I'm not the next Hokage, I'll be the one after that. And if I'm not that Hokage, I'll be dash dot. You know what I'm talking about, and it's not that. Shikamaru cut him off before he could go on a useless tangent. Don't skirt around this thing, Naruto. Do you think we're ready or not? Blue eyes panned over to the right and Naruto caught sight of Shikamaru giving him the same impassive, bored stare that Naruto was giving him in return. Behind it though, Naruto knew that Shikamaru was deadly serious. The entire reason they had left to expand their horizons for 3 years was so that they would not be caught off guard by the pending threat of what was supposed to be a group comprised of the ninja world's resident boogeyman. Does it matter? Naruto asked glibly as he shrugged his shoulders. Time's up. How would we know? I've never seen any of these guys. You've never seen any of these guys. All we know is that Ero-sensei's old teammate Orochimaru used to be one of them. And they had the strength kick him out, Take that any way you want, Tishika, but when or if they ever come, I'm not laying down for them. If they beat me, and I do mean if, you're gonna know I was there. That seemed to be enough to get Shikamaru off of his back as the young genius turned his eyes back towards the ocean. But then he opened his mouth again. If I was that kind of person, I'd shove you into the water for saying something that stupid, he said, getting a surprised look out of Naruto. Seriously, Naruto? We're gonna know you were there. What kind of crap is that? If I find out that I wasted 3 years training my ass off with you just for you to go down swinging. I don't plan on going down at all. You know that. Naruto interjected sharply before his friend could finish his statement. You got on the topic to start with, so if you don't like my answer, you shouldn't ask me the question. I'm being real, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. We've had 3 years to shake that baby shit. It's not like I can strike first instead of waiting for them to come to me, so all we can do is wait. So until then, all we can do is just try to act like everything is cool and you don't have a big red beacon in your belly. It works for every other marked man in the elemental nations, so it's good enough for me. Troublesome. You keep saying that. I'm starting to think that's your verbal tick. You would know, wouldn't you? Back and forth banter aside, the two simply kept on looking out at the ocean. They still had a few days of sailing before reaching their destination, where the mission would truly begin. That was what they needed to worry about. Naruto had a point. Akatsuki didn't matter right then. One issue at a time, it seemed. Prioritization was the word of the day. Mizu no Kuni, hidden Otagakure base. When he walked through the halls, people wisely moved out of his way. The nameless, faceless, masked Otagakure grunts would only bow and greet him with a curt Kimimaro-sama, which was well advised, because he didn't suffer fools that would waste his time with petty talk idly. He had been in full control of Orochimaru's ambitions to procure peoples of interest in Mizu no Kuni, and there had been plenty of opportunities to snatch up experiment subjects for his master with the ongoing war that had been happening at the time. The end of Mizu's civil hostilities, though, put something of a damper on that. After the disappearance of the Yondaime Mizukage Yagura, the war effort in the resident hidden village sharply declined and petered out altogether. The village of Kirigakure reunified under a Mizukage that had been recognized by the water daimyo. That was Otagakure's mistake. An opening presented itself during the Civil War, and Orochimaru saw to the double-crossing, the defeat, and the capture of Yagura himself. Kimimaro had of course been there assisting in the battle personally, along with his closest friend with a hair-trigger berserk switch, and victory had been a foregone conclusion. Orochimaru's combat prowess against the Jinchuriki Mizukage had been glorious, and everything had gone off without a hitch. The Sanbi had been extracted and confined until a suitable new Jinchuriki had been found. And one had been presented in the form of the youngster walking beside the pale-haired bone-manipulating shinobi through the dimly lit halls, Yukimaru. I told you when you first arrived here that your unique abilities would be valued under Orochimaru-sama, and now you have been recognized for your importance. The boy next to Kimimaro was younger, under the age of 13 from the looks of things. He had magenta eyes and very long pale olive hair. A plain long gray kimono top adorned his frame with dark green pants and a purple rope belt tied around his waist in a bow over his back. From the bright look in his eyes, he seemed to revere Kimimaro and took pride in hearing those words from him. It had been 8 months since the Sanbi had been sealed inside of this boy Yukimaru, who had abilities that were able to somewhat control the creature. Whatever connection between the two there happened to be, they were compatible enough that there was no backlash dealt to the boy's body due to the sealing. You will have a home with us as the Jinchuriki of the Sanbi. Orochimaru-sama will keep you close to him forever as long as you continue to serve your all-important purpose. Closer than Yukimaru would ever be aware of as well. With the Sanbi in his body, Yukimaru had become a leading prospect to house Orochimaru's soul next once the time came for him to make the switch. Whatever Yukimaru's bodily composition was comprised of either physically or chakra-wise, it was able to tame the mighty Biju within him. A Jinchuriki body without the fuss of losing control over the beast within. It was simply too much for Orochimaru to overlook. And who could blame him? Kimimaro certainly wouldn't. While Kimimaro wished to serve the Snake Sun in as best he could, and he saw no better way to do so for all eternity than to be the shell for the man's soul, he did have to admit that he realized that he could serve his lord more efficiently and completely as his outlying vassal, enforcing his will out of Orochimaru's reach. My home is here with all of you and Orochimaru-sama now, right Kimimaro? Yukimaru said with a heartfelt smile to the ever-stoic Otogakure elite. Sure, he had started out as a prisoner and a test subject with that strange person Kabuto, but when it was deemed that he was so special he was treated exceedingly better after being sent to Mizu no Kuni. Yes, it couldn't be ignored that Kimimaro was something of a cold person, but Yukimaru liked him. And he liked that woman that he had met in that town Digarashi port, that Gurren lady. He wondered when he would see her again. She was pretty and treated him just as well as Kimimaro did. Even when he said that he didn't want to be a ninja and train to fight, that was just fine with all of them. For him to find a home with a roving hidden ninja village without needing to fight, that was wonderful for him. Upon hearing Yukimaru's words, Kimimaro peered over and down to him before allowing the minutest of smiles to move his lips as he looked away once more. That's right. Yukimaru noticed that the amount of Oto manpower was starting to get thinner and thinner in the direction of the base that they were walking, and to him that only meant one thing: are we going to see your friend again? A nod came from Kimimaro as they came upon the door that they intended to enter. The entire wall around the steel door was steel as well, and it sported the most complete security measures in the entire base as far as it went, in the door remaining closed to whomever was inside. It was like the ultimate solitary confinement cell. Lifting out an arm, Kimimaro stuck his arm into a slot meant for it and began manipulating the bones in it in certain specific patterns that unlocked differing tumblers of the thick door until every lock was removed. As he pulled his arm back out and the bones slid back underneath his skin, Kimimaro turned towards Yukimaru. Stay back and out of his sight when I open the door. I don't know what kind of mindset he'll be in when I do. Obediently, Yukimaru moved aside and allowed Kimimaro to pull the door open and walk inside without an ounce of fear on his face. The same could not be said for the new young Jinchuriki, who could only stand back and watch. Once inside, Kimimaro looked around and saw a very tall young man with spiky orange hair, black pants, and a tan shirt, sitting down facing a corner. Slowly walking inside, Kimimaro eventually stopped just out of reach of the large inhabitant of the room, Jugo. He said, to get his attention. He really hoped that he wasn't in one of his moods. Jugo didn't answer though, and eventually Kimimaro reached out and put a hand on his shoulder. Kimimaro prepared to defend himself when he felt Jugo tense up, but calmed down when Jugo turned around and looked up at him in surprise. Oh, Kimimaro. Good to see you, he said, revealing that he had been playing with a small mouse to occupy himself. You as well. Kimimaro returned with an actual smile at seeing that his good friend wasn't in a murderous state of mind at the moment. He then frowned at the sight of the mouse in Jugo's hands. You do know that those animals carry disease, don't you? He shook his head when Jugo ignored him and just put the small creature onto the floor to scuttle off elsewhere. Do you feel in control enough to make rounds of the base with Yukimaru and myself? Looking towards the door, Jugo saw Yukimaru peering his head into the room once it was more or less confirmed that it was safe. He got up from the floor to tower over a full foot in height over Kimimaro as they both began to walk to the door to leave the room. Yes. I'm fine today. Even if I wasn't, I'm certain that you can stop me. Besides, being around a spirit like Yukimaru helps me remain calm. Shall we go then? Kimimaro said, getting agreement from both Jugo and Yukimaru. With that, the three of them left to observe the day-to-day proceedings of the Otogakure base. There was always work to be done, and Kimimaro trusted no one else as much as Jugo. A few days later, Konohagakure no Sato, Naruto's apartment. It was definitely the good life for Jiraiya. Why pay money for a hotel when he could just bum a place to sleep from his apprentice while he was out of town on a life-threatening mission? He never needed to keep his own place, he was never in the village for long enough. Naruto's bed was awfully comfortable due to seeing no use for 3 years, but truth be told the brat would need a bigger one if he ever planned on entertaining any female company over there. Hey, that was a good idea for a birthday present. A large and sturdy bed. A man's bed, one would say. But that could be done later. Way later. After a very good nap. Bang bang bang. A nap that would come later as well, because someone had apparently not gotten the memo that Naruto wasn't in town. Begrudgingly, Jiraiya sat himself up and stood to walk out of the room and to the front door groggily. Upon opening the door he woke up very quickly at the sight of the rather displeased blonde woman standing out front. "Hello Tsunade-hime." Jiraiya said dumbly, blinking as he tried to think of something else to say. "Naruto's not here right now." "I know that, Jiraiya," Tsunade said in a deceptively sweet voice. "I've known for quite a while now, though I didn't find out until 2 days after he'd already left. And then that led to me having to dismiss myself of my contract with the daimyo without using Naruto as an excuse." That was a fun conversation to have with the man. It clearly hadn't been a fun conversation at all. "I didn't know anything about that," Jiraiya assured her as he backed away into the apartment, "but you had to know that the exact day that his contract ran out he would be out of there. Seriously, did you really expect those 2 kids to hang around any longer than they needed to?" Tsunade's eye twitched at the thought. Consideration for others that would have left at the same time would have been nice. It's clear that being a guardian didn't beat thoughtfulness into their heads. A derisive snort came from Jiraiya as Tsunade sat down on a chair and Jiraiya went to the kitchen to scrounge up some refreshments for the guest. It wasn't his house, but he'd reimburse Naruto somehow. "Yeah right, I don't think there was much time for that when they were whipping those kids into killing shape. Did you ever sit in on any of the earlier sessions they had with Naruto and the Nara kid?" "I did. That was some brutal stuff. It was admittedly almost as bad as the physical training that he made Naruto do when he trained him for the Chunin exams, only the Guardians did it every single day. The only thing that kept it from actually being worse was the fact that Naruto's body was already durable. Shikamaru hadn't been nearly as durable and he suffered a ton in the beginning because of it." While Tsunade had never gotten a chance to watch the training in the early days of Naruto and Shikamaru's tenure, she or Shizune repeatedly had to receive Shikamaru as a patient from whatever they had done to toughen them up. But it had obviously paid off in dividends because within 3 months they were running missions like they had never missed a beat at all. As if they had been members all along. As a matter of fact, as the months carried over into years, she saw both of them less and less for medical reasons. So either they were getting hurt and never coming to her, or they simply weren't getting hurt enough to justify using a medicnin's time. That was something she hadn't thought about with as busy as her work kept her over the last 3 years, and it wasn't like she never saw either of them. Tsunade and Shizune saw them a lot, just to spend some time with them, never for anything important unless one of them needed a favor. So that begged the question, because they were running back-to-back B-rank to A-rank missions and seemingly never racking up any wounds severe enough to require serious attention, "Jiraiya, how strong are those 2? Jiraiya just shrugged out of Tsunade's line of sight as kept looking for something to serve as a good host in the home that wasn't his. "Beats me." "Why are you asking me?" "Because you trained one of them, jackass. Shouldn't that have been obvious?" "I didn't teach Naruto everything he knows how to do though." "I couldn't." "And Shikamaru? Forget about it. He didn't teach that kid anything really. The seals he somehow taught himself after I was through teaching him those, and his Jinchuriki training. He took some time off to visit Takigakure's Jinchuriki to learn some helpful tricks from her after some unpleasantness happened when I tried to get him to use more chakra than he was ready for. That reminded him to show Tsunade the scar on his chest later. Maybe she'd pity him, and from there, who knew?" "So what did you teach him?" Tsunade asked with a raised eyebrow. Jiraiya turned and pointed towards the sky. "How to be a man. How to look the devil himself in the eye and make that bastard blink like he'd gotten a lemon squeezed in his retina. How to get the women to dash." Hearing Tsunade growl at his eccentricity, he quickly cut his spiel short. "I completed his ninjutsu theory." "Who do you think finished his elemental training? And then there was the helping him learn how to use the ash ninjutsu that I know you know about. I kind of taught him the theory of how I work with toad oil in my own fire release jutsu." Tsunade let out a grunt of understanding. She wasn't a fan of the whole ash thing because of where the idea came from, but it was a pretty versatile wrinkle to his game. "Anything else?" "Ask him yourself. I'm not his walking, talking playbook. You should have been paying attention to all of that crap yourself anyway," Jiraiya stated tersely, finally giving up on procuring refreshments for the 2 of them. "Wanna go get lit at a bar?" "How irresponsible can you get, Jiraiya?" "Honestly," replied Tsunade sternly, as the 2 seemingly had a stare down prior to breaking down in loud and raucous laughter. "Oh, that was a good one. Come on, let's go. Tsunade said, getting up and allowing Jiraiya to open the door for her. I couldn't even take that one seriously. I mean, who am I, the Hokage? Ha. With the Kiri relief team, on board commandeered ship. Oh, that feels so good, Goldie-kun. Ino said, sitting down on the deck, leaning back into a crate that Naruto was sitting on behind her. She never thought that a back, neck, and shoulder rub could feel so damn heavenly, but when she had spent the last 2 days with the exception of a 4-hour napping shift running through every corner of Gurren's mind for intel on the state of the island nation, it did. It was also a lot harder to do when she didn't even know where to start looking. Where did you learn how to do this? And it wasn't like Naruto wasn't enjoying it either. A license and a pass to freely have hands on Ino? Not a bad way to spend a boring boat ride, to say the least. Adapt to survive, Ino-chan, that's all you're getting out of me. But I will say that it helps to calm down crazy musician girls that throw wind blades from their instruments, so I definitely know it'll help you feel better. Ino was in such a blissful state she wasn't even going to try and bring up the almost comparison between her and the crazy musician girl that he was talking about. That was just some drama that would stress her out further. Ahem. The two were then forced to pay attention, as at the time Naruto had sat the tense girl down to relieve some of her stress, Ino had been addressing the amassed party that would be entering the territory of Mizu no Kuni. It had been mostly incoherent rambling because she had been so stressed, but there was still the matter that Asuma, Shikamaru, Yamato, Anko, and Haku were still waiting nearby for some news. If you are through with the intimate groping Anko said, amused though she was by the byplay. She was still ready to figure out how to stick it to Orochimaru the moment that they got to some land. We have an actual briefing to do. Before we land and have no idea what we're getting into, please. Both Naruto and Ino glared at Anko, as there had been no aforementioned groping going on the way she had so brazenly stated, but she had a point. It was time to get to work. Okay, fine. Ino said, a bit perturbed as she got started. I think Haku should tell us about Mizu no Kuni for the sake of background and why getting anything out of Gurren was so important in the first place. Blushing at being put on the spot so suddenly, Haku, dressed in her hunter-nin garb once again for the chance that she would be returning to her village and getting right to work once she did, got up to take her impromptu course in public speaking. Well, Mizu no Kuni is a nation comprised of hundreds, possibly more than 1,000 islands of varying sizes. Many are inhabited with towns and villages, but most of them are not. Many are not large enough or have worthwhile resources for settlements worth setting up. But, they're big enough and have the resources for other things, right? Shikamaru finished for Haku as he understood why it was important to pick Gurren's brain for Oto information. Just because the islands are too small for towns for the general population doesn't mean that they're useless. Exactly. Haku continued, glad that they were following along. Maybe she wasn't as bad at speaking to others en masse as she thought. There is a reason that the civil war in Kiri didn't peter out no matter how harshly the Mizukage pressed to stop us, a reason why we have an abnormally high number of missing nin, and a reason that we created the Hunter Nin Corps for dealing with them, in particular within our nation. The islands are Kirigaku's greatest strength in comparison to other nations with hidden villages, but also a massive detriment to us. Way too many islands without names. Way too many islands that hadn't been mapped or even discovered yet. It was just too much. The amount of places to hide and retreat to were impossible to fully count. And that was a major problem when there was a smart and fully organized force of smugglers, raiders, pirates, whatever one wished to label the Otogakuer forces leeching off of the lands. They made self-sustaining hidden bases on the mainland to begin with. In a place where there were so many islands that constituted natural places to hide, it was even easier to set up shop. Yagura had royally screwed up when he partnered with Orochimaru to end the civil war. What was meant to be a symbiotic relationship ended up as a parasitic one. Otogakuer has been bleeding this place dry. Ino said, going back to referencing what she had gotten from Gurren. Throughout the civil war they worked as freelance marauders for the Yondaime Mizukage, attacking rebels on his paid request, but they captured anyone from either side that they found interesting. And then it ended, and they never left. Yamato and Anko looked at each other, knowing exactly why they never left. Mizu no Kuni was lucrative for Orochimaru's ambitions to know everything about ninjutsu in the world. Orochimaru has a thing for experimenting unique bloodlines and ninjutsu styles. Anko stated matter-of-factly, this place has to be a gold mine for him as far as that goes. The Umbu member of the group, Yamato, could only look at his hands before he looked out amongst his team. I know firsthand the kinds of things that Orochimaru likes to do with the special bloodlines of others. And he had 3 years here, dear Kami. Asuma wordlessly rested a hand on the younger man's shoulder, knowing Yamato's whole origin story and the root of his secret techniques, getting a nod of acknowledgement from Yamato in return. While the kids were left out of the loop, so to speak, Anko and Asuma knew what was up in that regard and knew that it cut Yamato deep to think about. Anko especially could relate. This returned attention back to Ino as she proceeded, eyes closed blissfully as Naruto's hands continued their dutiful work. Gurren didn't come here much. There was someone else stationed here to head up the entire operation, and she was only sent here once in a while when there was something that needed her touch. Oh, right there Naruto, stay there. As Naruto did as instructed, Ino let out a hum before someone cleared their throat. Oh. Apparently she needed an escort to navigate her way to the island that they used. She never came herself. So if she needed help to get to their base, just what did Ino pull out of her head worth a damn? Did you get anything that we can use? Asuma asked. Anything at all? Don't insult me, Asuma-sensei. Ino chided at the attempted slight towards her interrogation skills. Of course I did. I spent 2 days getting way more than I wanted and I narrowed it down. It's not a wide area, but the map says that there are numerous islands there clustered. Does anyone have a map? Haku quickly produced a map of the Mizu no Kuni landmasses that were sprinkled throughout the waters of the region. Setting it down in front of Ino, Haku's brow furrowed when the blonde Yamanaka girl pointed out a clustered area of islands to the south, on the outside of the barrier of islands that comprised the core of the country. The further away from the mainland island of Mizu no Kuni there were just so many smaller fragmented islands that without being able to trail someone back to the hideout it was impossible to determine where they were coming from. It was common knowledge that Otagakuer would have had a hideout on one of the too numerous to count islands on the outsides of Mizu no Kuni's jurisdiction. But it had to be there, didn't it? In the south. Haku had suspicions, but never enough reasoning to bring such concerns forward before then. It was estimated that I suspected as much, but that area is disputed territory between several countries. No large military operation can be done there without it being seen as an aggressive move to the nearby countries. That was a good place to hide for those that could get away with it. Kirigakuer did not want to be the initiators of a regional war after years of dealing with a civil war within their own borders and years of purges in the meantime. It was most certainly not the time for them to be throwing their weight around without something to back it up yet. Maybe if this had happened a short time later after a potential strong showing at the upcoming Chunin exams, but without anything to give them any bluster, there could be no reasoning or bullying the other regional powers into dealing with it and shutting up. Asuma just grunted and lit himself a cigarette as he listened. He hated politics. It was one reason why he was never keen on his father's position of Hokage despite the honor and prestige of the position. Just too much BS for his liking, even when it wasn't sent his way. Screw all of that. The politics just muddied the water too much for his taste. Subterfuge had its place and whatnot, they were shinobi after all, but seriously, it was like a massive chess game using human pieces, which was a wonder why he didn't have more of a taste for it because he happened to love shogi. So if Kiri actually sent out an expedition force to hunt the dozens and dozens of little clustered islands in this region, Naruto started to reason as he looked at the map and all of the markers around the unmarked location that Ino had pointed out. All of the other powers of the area like Benishu Island, Umi no Kuni, and Nadeshiko village will piss and moan and bitch and cry and try to swell up on Kiri, and you can't afford to deal with that right now. Haku nodded and frowned, sharing Naruto's apparent distaste for the situation. I hate this kind of crap. It certainly makes the job harder. Yamato agreed, stroking his chin in thought. Harder but still not impossible. We just have to be a little inventive when the time comes. We need to go to Kirigakuer first to see what resources the Mizukage can spare for us before we can actually work out a plan of action. Ino, do you have more? Still with Naruto rubbing her shoulders, Ino was more or less at his mercy. I'm just getting started, Yamato Taijo, you should all get comfortable because this'll take a while. Yeah, get comfortable like her. Because if Naruto kept things up like that she could talk all afternoon and evening long without a problem. Some time later, main island of Mizu no Kuni, Kirigakure no Sato, Mizukage's office. A large village that always seemed to have a thick mist casting out the sun within its borders, Kirigakure was a rather hilly place, surrounded by mountains outside of its limits and containing many cliff faces and ledges within. Many large, cylindrical buildings of various sizes with trees at the tops of them and elevated roads and bridges strewn about the village comprised some of the more prominent infrastructure that had been amicably rebuilt and restored once peace had been restored and the rift between the armed forces of Kiri had been healed. In the largest of these buildings in the center of the village, therein lay the office of the leader of the island-born ninja settlement. Staring out of the full-sized windows that comprised the end wall of her office, the Mizukage looked back at her desk at all of the files of shinobi that sat upon it with a frown. All of the files had at least one thing in common, the stamp of missing in action right across the front of them. The Mizukage was a gorgeous woman with exceptionally long auburn hair in a certain spiked pattern down her back in a top knot, bangs going down over her face with one actually covering her right eye. She wore a long-sleeved shoulder dress that went past her knees, left open on the right side going down past her hip. Underneath she wore mesh leggings and high-heeled sandals with shin guards that went up to her knees. Mizukage-sama. Her attention was turned towards the entrance to her office where she saw one of her elite shinobi, standing there patiently dressed in a garb similar to Haku's, by way of his different-styled blue kimono and turtleneck undershirt. The mighty Terumi taking a break. Pointed out joking as he was beckoned forth to enter the office of his superior. Upon reaching the desk he looked down at all of the files and frowned. I can see why though. It is difficult to keep going through all of these. The Mizukage, Terumi said as she retook her seat at her desk, 5 more this week captured while out on missions. What did Yagura do to us? It had been years at this point since she had been accepted by the Water Daimyo as the successor to the Mizukage seat and the problem of Otagakure plaguing the countryside still prevailed. Sighed and ran a finger over the bridge of his nose, taking care to avoid the right eye of his that was covered by the patch. I'm as certain as I've ever been Mizukage-sama, Yagura was under the influence of a genjutsu. He was being controlled. I just couldn't get close enough to prove it before I was accused of treason. She knew that much back during the Civil War days, and that was why was so important as a censor to the village, not just for his attentive nature and his already impressive ability to feel out chakra signatures, but for the secret that he concealed behind his eye patch. If he swore to her that Yagura was under a genjutsu, the man had been under a genjutsu. It would also have given weight to his sudden disappearance as well, because no one knew what had happened to him. But still, wasn't one to visit just for the novelty of it. That meant that he was there for something important. At least important enough to bring it to her attention. Is there anything you've come to report to me? Yes. Haku has returned from her mission to Konohagakure to request assistance from them. Informed Mei, who smiled at the touch of good news. She was the only one of the squad that we dispatched to return though. And there went the wind right out of her sails, only one returned out of a team of 4. They truly didn't want us to get word to Konoha. But one did return though, and hopefully with good results. Did they agree to assist us? Nodded with a small smile, thankfully. They sent 2 high-level people that are probably more qualified to deal with Otagakure short of one of the Sunin or the Hokage themselves, Mitarashi Anko and Mokuton no Tenzo. In addition to that they've sent us the son of the Hokage himself, Sarutobi Asuma, as well as 3 Chunin, but 2 of them wear the sash of the 12 Guardian Ninja group as well. They looked awfully familiar to as well, but he could look in on that later. Facts came first. Mei was actually quite surprised that Konoha was willing to dispatch such assistance to them. Kirigakure and Konohagakure had never particularly been close before. Aside from a skirmish here or there between forces working on conflicting missions once every so often, they didn't really have any kind of relationship with each other, antagonistic or otherwise. The surprise was of course pleasant, because after the end of the Civil War 2 years ago, Kiri needed to extend some olive branches, and having one seemingly extended to them from Konoha was the best thing they could ask for at the moment. Still, Yagura had gotten them burned before doing something like that with Oto years ago, so she had to play this carefully. It was only 6 people, but caution still needed to be taken. I would like to speak to them as soon as possible. Mei requested, in the same vein asking to retrieve them and bring them to her. He bowed, understanding what she was asking without needing to be further prompted on that front. I'd like an eye to be kept on them for the time being though. She didn't want to seem ungrateful, but village security was village security. Ah just smirked though. Haku is still with them and seemed to have no designs of leaving this mission alone, but I was already way ahead of you when it came to that Mizukage-sama. Elsewhere in Kirigakure, with Konoha relief team. The entire Konoha team walked through the village being led by Haku at their forefront as she intended to show them around. Perhaps even find somewhere to stop and eat before things got busy for them. Times weren't exactly the most settled down, but for Haku who had been dealing with the civil war since returning to the motherland so to speak, having a foreign enemy was something of a dream situation to bring the village together. You'll love meeting Mizukage-sama. Haku assured them as she continued to walk them down one of Kiri's elevated constructed paths. She is a very kind and wise person. She was the person that believed in me when I said that I had returned to achieve Zabuza-sama's dream of bringing down the Yondaime Mizukage. Anko stroked her chin in thought, now very interested in meeting this new Mizukage the more she heard about her, the first female Kage in history. That's seriously interesting. She's got to be much stronger than any male shinobi elite just to be considered for the position with her gender. She's the strongest woman in the world I believe. Haku said in a heartfelt and adoring manner while Naruto and Shikamaru moved near each other to talk out of earshot. I don't think Tsunade-bachan would like hearing that one too much. Naruto whispered, getting a nod out of Shikamaru. Asuma heard them and snickered at the thought. I think a lot of stuff would get turned to rebel before she'd let that one go. Asuma just kept snickering. Tsunade-sama traumatized you too much while you were gone Naruto. All Naruto did was whistle innocently while Shikamaru acted like they hadn't just brought up she who should not be referenced from afar. Number 1, well imagine growing up with her as your dad's student. Man, I've got some horror stories for you too. Since they hadn't really talked too much, even when they had first run across each other in Nami no Kuni, Ino decided to take the moment to get to know the kunoichi closest in age to her at the moment in Haku. So you came back here after the mission where you fought us? Haku nodded yes to the question. What was that like? It's hard to explain the concept of war deeper than the surface if you've never been involved in it yourself. Haku said with a frown. It was an understandable question. Any battle you've ever fought, there is no comparison as far as scale. You see things happen all over that you have no control over, no matter how strong you believed yourself to be prior to it. I don't wish such a thing onto you, but if you don't fight in one I can't make it clear to you just what I mean. It's okay. You don't have to if it's that difficult. Ino was just curious. She had heard her father talk about it for years. It was just a thought that someone closer to her age could give her a comparison. Konoha had never fought a war within her generation. But both Inoichi and Haku had said something similar, about how no battle she had ever fought would compare to a battle in war no matter how powerful the enemy. An overhearing Yamato interjected for the benefit of his younger underling on this mission, just hope that a war doesn't occur within your lifetime, but be prepared for when it does. The elemental nations always go through a pretty vicious cycle. He had already fought in the Third Shinobi World War by the time he had been 13, so if anyone knew it was him, don't worry about that right now though. Be prepared to recant to the Mizukage everything that you told us on the ship. Ino's face was fixed in understanding determination as she had never been in such a prominent position on any mission before, let alone an S-rank mission. Wow, way to jump back into the saddle with her teammates in regards to working. They certainly didn't do anything halfway, probably much to Shikamaru's chagrin. Hearing information brought up another thought from Haku though, what of the Otagaku or captive Gurren? We're going to keep her as a prisoner and take her back to Konoha for more interrogation when we have more time. She's still supposed to be ours. Naruto answered for her, throwing an arm around both Haku and Ino in a friendly chipper manner. Me and Shika know just how hard it is to take one of them and keep them alive, and we've got an elite ninja that knows a lot about the mainland stuff that they're into, so we can't just hand her over. Sorry. As long as we can cast Otagaku out of Mizu no Kuni, I don't think the Mizukage will care what becomes of a prisoner that you captured to begin with. Haku said with a smile. This was certainly a different Team 10. The first time Shikamaru seemed to be the only one that had his ducks in a row, but he didn't have the drive to do anything with it. Now Ino seemed to be in charge of information, trusted with it over her actual superiors, and Naruto seemed to be an all-around cool hand operator instead of a jittery brawler, apparently completely at ease with a timed stipulation-laden battle behind enemy lines with their overall commander. Naruto just let out a laugh and shook his head. I've got a clone on the boat guarding her until we get back there just in case she finds a way to break free. Even though we have what we need by now, I can't really use my toads to ferry her back to Konoha because they can't stand salt water, so we've got to keep her the old-fashioned way. The entire time that Ino and Naruto seemed to be getting along with Haku, and Asuma and Yamato seemed to be taking stock of the situation, making preliminary plans of action to pitch to the Mizukage once they had met with her, Shikamaru was being kind of quiet. Something felt off. You feel like we're being watched, don't you, kid? Anko asked him, as the trench-coat-clad Kunoichi moved to walk closer to the uncharacteristically silent genius. Even by Shikamaru's standards of avoiding troublesome conversation, he was being quiet. What do you think? It's not the atmosphere of the village, not the villagers. Shikamaru said, looking around. I don't feel like we're being followed by an enemy either, because it doesn't have that feeling to it. But I do feel some bloodlust in the area. Killing intent maybe. Are you sure it's not just me? Your bloodlust is mostly for show and we all know it. Well. Check out the big brains on the brat. Whatever. As they continued to walk and passed over a crack in the road, from inside of it, water seemed to gush out and take the form of a person directly behind Naruto, stopping the moving convoy right in its tracks. A lean young man with straight white hair and purple eyes that wore a purple sleeveless shirt, bandages around his neck, and gray pants along with a kiri headband tied around his forehead and what looked like Zabuza's old sword strapped to his back. Well, isn't this a pretty little picture that I can't help but want to cut apart? The white-haired young man said, grinning to show pointed teeth like Zabuza as well. He positioned a finger against Naruto's head in a gun-like gesture. You Konoha ninja should know to watch your step in a foreign village no matter what. I did. Naruto said before dispelling in smoke, revealing himself to be a clone. Instead of being angry, the young man was amused and saw Naruto standing not too far away, glaring at him. Not bad. He admitted, I can't believe that you had that substitution planned in advance, so that was some quick moving on your part to pull it off without me noticing. Yeah, it was planned. Naruto said, not taking his eyes off of the seemingly hostile person in front of him. I'm not too shabby of a sensor, and even if I wasn't, I can sense your kind of killing intent from a mile away. Zabuza's was worse. But that might be because I was a kid back then too. It looked like it was going to be a standoff of sorts as another Kiri ninja ran up. Suijutsu, what are you doing? These are the people sent to help us. Another young man arrived, only this time he looked rather meek with short blue hair, glasses connected to what looked like earphones, a long-sleeved blue pinstriped shirt, camouflage patterned pants, and a unique-looking large sword covered in bandages on his back. You can't just jump them. I wasn't jumping them all. The aforementioned Suijutsu then pointed at Naruto. I was just jumping him. I don't like him. As Naruto pointed at himself dumbly, Asuma gave Naruto a few pats on the shoulder. Most people don't. But still though, you aren't just going to attack our team member unprovoked when we've been sent here to do a mission requested by you. Are you trying to start a war? Any response Suijutsu would have possibly given was cut off at a rather high-pitched squeal that put a big grin on the swordsman's face as he turned to meet a flying glump from Haku. Suijutsu-kun. Glad you're alright, Haku. Suijutsu said in return before giving Haku a peck on the lips, much to the surprise of the younger Team 10. What? You got a problem? By now Ino was rubbing her temple at all of the things that had been presented to them over the last couple of days. You're telling us that you're her boyfriend? Sure, why not? There was probably a story there, but for once Ino felt that she'd be better off without it. She had received all of the information that she could stand. And after having spent an exorbitant amount of time around Jiraiya, Naruto knew exactly why Suijutsu had been sending killing vibes his way before springing the surprise attack. Oh, my bad. Naruto said, holding his hands up defensively. That hug was a friend kind of thing, not a trying to get into her pants kind of thing. He might have been trained by Jiraiya, but he had standards and he drew the line solidly at putting moves on another guy's lady. Suijutsu nodded, content that Naruto had recognized what was up. but then he felt Haku's touch turn cold and looked at his pleasantly smiling lady friend and knew that spelled trouble. Suijitsu-kun, I would appreciate it if you didn't attack my friends again. They've come to help us get rid of Otagakure, you see. Ah, got it. He said in an effort to calm her down. The last thing he needed was to be frozen solid. It wouldn't have taken much from Haku with her Kekai Genkai. Well, this is Kirigakure. I'm Hozuki Suijitsu, and the pansy swordsman over there is Chujuura. 2 of the 7 ninja swordsmen of the mist. Chujuura walked up to Yamato and adjusted his glasses on his face nervously. Sorry about Suijitsu. He's a bit, well, I really shouldn't say. But we were sent to make sure that you got to the Mizukage's office without any problems. Because that's been going swimmingly so far. Shikamaru chimmered in dryly, pointing out Suijitsu's little jealous snap. He was sure there was more to it than just escorting them, but for the time being he'd keep his mouth shut, probably a show of force to let us know that they're not as weak as the world would think they are after the end of their war. Because those swords weren't just regular weapons, they were national treasures. The sword Suijitsu had was Zabuza's old weapon Kubikuri Boucho, and he was guessing that Chujuura's weapon on his back was another of the famed swords of Kiri's most infamous fighting force. No matter how Suijitsu acted and how Chujuura seemed to outwardly be, they were still strong enough to be selected, and to send them just to escort them to the Mizukage's office. Well, message received loud and clear as far as Shikamaru was concerned. Don't screw around with Kiri. Either way, they were heading to the office of the most powerful ninja in Kirigakure now. Let the true S-rank mission begin, for better or for worse. River inlet of the main Mizu no Kuni Island, with Konoha team's confiscated ship. Well, what do we have here? Kisame said with a predatory grin. He knew what one of those ships was supposed to be. From Gato Company. Gato was just one of Orochimaru's puppets on a string, and it was this far inland. He'd bet money that it was meant to be a ship meant to raid for more test subjects for the Snake Sunin's experiments. Shall we investigate, Itachi-san? Itachi and Kisame stood outside of the ship just looking at it as it sat calmly just anchored offshore in the river. I believe I should investigate on my own. No offense, of course, but your kind of investigation would possibly destroy whatever information we could possibly obtain from this. Kisame let out a good-natured scoff, but was mostly fine with it. Fine with me. If it's not time for me to cut loose and cut something up, there's no need getting me involved anyway. I would probably just ruin whoever was inside of there. Information is golden after all. He finished with a cryptic chuckle. Go on ahead. By the time he looked to his side towards his partner, Itachi was already gone to get on board. Heh. I don't know whether it's lucky I'm not getting on with him, or unlucky because Itachi-san is going to be fishing for some info. On board the ship, Itachi looked around on the deck to find no one. Not that he really expected anyone to be there. Gato's ships were only really sent in this far to ferry Otagakure ninja close enough to snatch up captives. Walking inside, he ventured down to the hold where he could feel the presence of others. How many he was soon to find out. Hopefully they would be Oto forces instead of just some of Gato's hired hand sailors. They were useless when it came to any kind of information. You can glare at me all you want to, Gurren. Itachi stopped at the door to the storage room when he heard the voice of a young man inside of it. This is as much your fault as it is ours that you're in this situation. You'd better hope I never get out of here, brat. Itachi could hear a second voice, one of a female belonging to the Gurren person within. You'd better just kill me now because I'll spend the rest of my life just waiting to get you back, Uzumaki. I'm so scared. The first person in the room said in a sarcastic tone of voice, Look. Look at my face. Look at how scared I am. Don't you see it? The door then slowly creaked open and Itachi caught sight of who he presumed to be Gurren, restrained quite totally, utterly unable to free herself or move. And from the abject look of horror on her face she knew who he was from his attire alone, or at least who he represented. His attention wasn't quite set on her at the moment. Itachi's attention was on the other person in the room, someone who had initiated eye contact with him off of sheer instinct once the door opened. Poor unfortunate young man, how was he to know what awaited when he did so? The blonde hair, the blue eyes, whisker marks, and the attire that included the sash from the 12 Guardian Ninja. Hello, Naruto-kun. He said calmly to the paralyzed, Genjutsu hazed Naruto. how unexpected to find you here of all places. Omake, Guardian Days 3. 5 months after Naruto and Shikamaru's acceptance. Shizune had been gifted with a smaller office than Tsunade's own, but it was good for what she needed it for. She was never really there anyway because most of the time when nobles needed medical consult they sent out for it. Unless it was serious enough to require Tsunade, no one really came to the offices. But on a rare slow day as far as workload went, Shizune allowed herself a moment of rest to take some reading time to herself. Sitting at her desk, she had to admit that despite being a pervert of the highest caliber, Jiraiya could spin one hell of a literary yarn. The sex scenes weren't half bad either. Shizune, I need your help. That shout preceded Shizune's door being thrown open forcefully, stirring her from reading her copy of Icha Icha so that she could quickly hide it in her desk because she knew the voice of the person that opened her door. The last thing she needed was for him to catch her reading that book. That was something she didn't want to explain. What's the matter, Naruto-kun? Shizune asked, jumping up as she was ready to treat any bump or bruise that he felt had been serious enough to bring to her. Did you break your arm trying to screw around with that bigger Rasengan again? Naruto gave her a confused look before blushing in embarrassment. The way he entered it did seem like he was legitimately hurt, and that just wasn't the case. No. Sorry, but I'm not hurt. He did still need her help though. I have a question. Oh, he just wanted some advice. That was something pleasant. It was good that she didn't have to deal with any injuries today. I have an answer. Shizune replied in turn, sitting back down at her desk and gifting Naruto with a warm smile. What do you need? Such a nice boy. A skittish-looking Naruto looked down at the ground and seemed rather hesitant to talk about whatever he wanted. Eventually coming face to face with Shizune raising an eyebrow in curiosity, Naruto figured that it was time to fess up. He was wasting her time after all, and he had work to get back to. Fine. I need help getting rid of someone. You can't kill any of the nobles. Shizune frowned at Naruto and rested one of her cheeks in her hand with a sigh. I know sometimes it seems really appealing. And I know that sometimes you've got it worked out to the very last detail about how you can sneak that odorless, tasteless poison into their food if they proposition you and grab your butt one more time during the 20th damn health screening they schedule in 4 months just to hit on you, when you keep telling them that you're a professional and not interested. And you know you can get away with it because, oh, who's going to run the autopsy? That's right, it's you dash. Whoa. Naruto stopped Shizune and reached over her desk to grab her shaking hands as she got more riled up than he had ever seen her before. Where the hell did that come from? That was scary. Calm down, okay? Take some deep breaths, count to 10. It's alright. A nod came from the raven-haired medicnin as her breathing stopped coming out so erratically. I don't want to kill her though. Her? Shizune asked with a raised eyebrow. Okay, now she was really interested, if only to be nosy anyway. A shiver went down Naruto's spine and he nodded before getting back to his reasoning for being there. Nao. Now he didn't want to say that he hated someone, but damn it, that girl was pushing it really close. That girl is so aggressive it's creepy. And how does she keep reserving either me or Shikamaru for guard duty when she goes into town? She's 13. She shouldn't be able to do that herself. Aggressive girl troubles? She must have been outright forceful in how she informed Naruto of her outright desire for him if it actually spooked him that badly. The poor thing probably didn't know how to handle it, especially because he clearly had absolutely no interest in this Nao girl. Well, that was where older sister Shizune could give some help. Naruto was entirely uninterested in learning how to take care of himself medically since he was incompatible with learning medical ninjutsu, so advice was definitely where she could contribute heavily. The fact that he came to her instead of Tsunade spoke volumes. Why are you asking me instead of Tsunade-sama? Naruto opened his mouth to give a well-thought-out and rational explanation as to why he was coming to Shizune instead of Tsunade with something like that, but any answer he could have given would not have been as good as what the world gave to him at that exact moment. From slightly down the hall, crashing and rumbling could be heard from where Tsunade's office was. I know I have one more bottle of sake here somewhere. I am not sending to town for more without one bottle left. Those attendants they send out take forever. That was pretty much all the explanation that Naruto needed to give. Life experience didn't really translate into good advice on all fronts. He'd ask Tsunade about dealing with mission preparation and things like that. He'd save the more delicate social advice questions for well-mannered, even-tempered Shizune. Life would be safer for everyone that way. With an understanding nod, Shizune got up and put an arm around Naruto's shoulder as they left her office. "Walk with me, Naruto-kun, I need the company. We're going to town, and we'll see if I can't help you out on the way." As they left the building, Shizune threw a shout into Tsunade's office, "I'm going to get you more, Tsunade-sama," and you hid your last bottle around Taunton's neck. As they passed by, Naruto got a look into the war zone that was now Tsunade's office and saw the now calm woman enjoying a drink with her pet pig in her lap. As if she hadn't just rendered her office to shreds. How was Shizune so used to such a thing that she didn't even register it? Without saying a word, but with an all-telling thousand-yard stare on his face at the thought of going to that woman with anything intended to be sensitive, he merely hugged Shizune around the waist as they walked and got a few reassuring pats on the head for the gesture. Yes, Shizune would proceed to be Naruto's ever-present and sturdy rock of good sense in the tumultuous and unforgiving sea of crazy that came with his life led while he was a guardian ninja. And he would love her dearly for it. Someone had to be there to keep him from being driven to drinking, and she was the woman for the job when it came to helping him keep what was left of his sanity. That's it for part 22. Thank you for watching and see you on the next video.